You see the color of my beard, you probably realize that I do not use all these high-tech devices. And so I still use old-fashioned technology, paper and whatever. Now, moreover, I must say that speaking after Amal, I feel a little bit bad because she gave such a great lecture, well organized, well documented, and so on and so on. And what I'm going to do here is do storytelling or anecdotes, possibly, and tell you a few of my reflections on international education, some of my experience, part of it together with Moshe, as you heard, part of it since Moshe and myself went in different directions. So I apologize in advance for, let's say, the shallowness of my talk. And I would like to say a few words, first of all, on international academic education in general. I know that all of you are involved with that and you all know of it and so on, so maybe I would sound redundant, but you know, sometimes even redundance is not too bad. There are sometimes things that are good to mention again and again. And I would like, first of all, to say that what we are witnessing today in the world of international education, and I'm referring not only to the huge programs of the European Union, Erasmus, Erasmus Mundus, Tempus, Erasmus Plus that is on its way, I hope, I guess. But we know that practically every country in the world, every university in the world is involved in the international education. I'm not speaking now of the United States, where every university, every college, and so on, has an office of international academic affairs. It has a study abroad officer who takes care of students who come for short periods of time to the university or go to other places in the world. There are academic relations, not only in America, in South America, in Asia, everywhere in the world, in Africa, everywhere in the world. So it has become, I would say, a pillar of globalization. I mean, that's one of the parameters of globalization. And it has become a very important. I mean, globalization is a huge thing. We know that globalization involves international trade, international finance, international investments, international everything you can think of. Tourism, mobility of people among countries, and so on. I mean, it's a limitless world. But globalization of academic education has become a major issue. A number that I found, I don't know if it's correct or incorrect, a number that I found is that there are about 2.5 million students per year involved in study abroad programs all over the world, which is a significant number. It's true, 2.5 million out of how many? 8 billion? How many? What's the population of the world? I don't remember. 10 billion? 2.5 million people, young kids, mostly young kids, traveling around, going from one place to another, enjoying, absorbing knowledge, absorbing good things in other places, being exposed to other cultures, being exposed to other young people, the need to communicate with other people, to create a, how to say, siach, a dialogue with people from other cultures, other nationalities, and so on, other languages. I mean, it's a fantastic phenomenon. But you know, there is in the Bible, it says that there is nothing is new under the sun. Where does it appear? You should know. You are Kohelet, right? Kohelet. I don't know how to say Kohelet in English. Exactly. And I can tell you that if you look at history, international education existed for a very long time. Just a few stories about the history. You know that Aristotle he was in a sense an international student. He was born in a town called Stagirus in northern Greece, which was under the occupation of Macedonia. Macedonia was another country. And he chose to go to Athens to study with Plato, who was a great teacher, of course. At the academia, you know that Plato established the first academia in the world. I mean, he took his students to a place that was the burial ground of a famous hero of the Troy War, whose name was Academos. And they used to sit there on his grave and study, listen to Plato. I guess that he was the speaker and the students were only listening. Even though a student like Aristotle, I guess, also had something to say. So he was probably the first, as far as we know. As far as we know, maybe there were others who disappeared in history. There was in the Middle Ages, and this is something that in the programs of the European Union, it is mentioned again and again, that the first foreign student or the first study abroad student in, I wouldn't say modern history, but let's say in relatively recent history, was a guy called Emo of Friesland, who was Dutch. And in the year 1190, which is the 12th century, of course, he left his town, Friesland, and went to study at Oxford, which was a great event for somebody during the 12th century. As a matter of fact, when he finished his studies at Oxford, he came back to Holland and became a clergyman, a very well-known clergyman. During the 15th and 16th century, and this is something with which you are all related, Erasmus from Rotterdam. He was from Rotterdam, of course. He went to study at the University of Paris in the Sorbonne. And he spent their time. He also studied somewhere, I don't remember, I think in Basel. He was then professor of theology at Cambridge, England, of course, and then eventually returned to Rotterdam. So your program, which, by the way, one of your programs, the Erasmus program, that, by the way, is not named after Erasmus from Rotterdam, but it stands for, I don't know, European, and so on and so forth. Erasmus was an international student. Napoleon Bonaparte, he also promoted international education, and the reason he did that was obviously in order to increase his control over all the countries in Europe which were occupied by France at his time. And he thought that it would be good to have students from countries studying in other countries, in Europe, of course, in order to strengthen peace and security. Peace, of course, the Napoleonic time was not known as a very peaceful time. And then during the 19th century, study abroad programs started in the United States, and there were a few also in Europe, but mainly in the United States. Surprisingly, the first place where there was a study abroad program was Indiana University. It was probably one of the last places I thought that there is something of that kind. But it's understandable because, as you mentioned, and I think a few other people mentioned, academic institutions in the periphery need international education much more than universities or institutions that are in central cities. In a central city, the need for being exposed to other cultures and so on is much smaller because it's a big place. It's a big place with many people. But in Indiana, they needed to send students to France and Switzerland and Italy and so on in order to open their eyes. And they did it. They were the first, at least in the United States, to do it. They were followed, by the way, by Princeton University. Princeton did it not with Europe, but with China. They sent students of theirs in the summer to visit China and to learn about China, Chinese, and so on. And then they were followed by a third university that is also not very well-known university as the leading university, and that was the University of Delaware, that has developed, it was probably the third place where there was a foreign student, a study abroad program in the United States. I will not continue. In the 1950s, between the 1950s and the 1990s, things started developing all over the world, mainly in America and in Europe. And of course, today, in the present, we know that student exchange has become a central element of academic education, as I mentioned earlier, and there is no academic institutions, whether it's a university or a college, that respects itself, does not have an international program for students, and of course, other elements of academic activities, such as joint research with foreign scholars and so on and so forth. And the European Union has probably become the organization that has done the most bold step in the direction of creating international education with all the programs, Erasmus. It started with the Socrates program, I think, in the mid-1980s, if I'm not mistaken. It then continued with Erasmus, Erasmus Mundus, and so on. Tempus, of course. Now, the international education has become so important, and I don't remember who mentioned the Shanghai ranking, but not only the Shanghai ranking, there are many other rankings. Not many, there are a few other rankings. I don't like them, by the way, but I am not going to criticize them. It's not the place. But today we know that one of the important parameters in the ranking of a university, in the Shanghai ranking, the London Times, I don't know, it has a different name now, and so on, is the degree of involvement in international academic activity. And therefore, universities have the incentive to develop an international academic activity merely for the reason of raising their ranking in the Shanghai ranking that has become a kind of, how do you say, benchmark that is considered seriously but by almost every university in the world. Now, well, as globalization, there are a lot of people who love globalization. There are a lot of people, I'm speaking of globalization at large, in general. There are a lot of people who hate globalization or are very critical of globalization. There are people who gain from globalization. There are people who lose from globalization. Probably same, maybe not to the same extent, but same is with the globalization of academic education. There is no doubt that there are a lot of good things, a lot of very good things, a lot of wonderful opportunities, and there are also a few drawbacks that ought to be mentioned and ought to be minimized as much as possible. Now, what is the philosophy underlying international academic education? First of all, it brings people together, young people together, which is extremely important. It's important for the well-being of the young people themselves, and I will say a few words about that in a minute. It's certainly good for the understanding among people from different cultures, and some people claim that it contributes to world peace, which of course is a wonderful thing. And there is no proof that indeed it does contribute, but it's good to believe that. And it certainly doesn't hurt. It doesn't create, it doesn't operate against world peace. It is good for students. It is very good for students. We know that it exposes them to other cultures, to different approaches, and this is something I would say pedagogical, to different approaches to academic studies, which is, in my view, very, very important, and this will bring me in a minute to maybe some of the criticism that I have of the globalization and the way it is implemented. It exposes students to other mentalities. It nurtures a certain disposition towards, or I would say a certain openness to foreign cultures, and the respect for other people, for other peoples, which is extremely important. This is certainly something that operates in the right direction as far as peace is concerned, peace, understanding, and so on and so forth. It improves the knowledge of other worlds and regions, which is a practical thing, and I think it's important. In the global world, certainly, we want people to know a little bit of other countries, of other societies, of other business enterprise, I mean in other countries, and so on. It's certainly good, by the way, for academic performance. I mean, we know that academic performance, can be developed in one place, but when I say academic, I mean including research, it certainly is very important to join forces and combine forces from a variety of places. So, and it increases, of course, the familiarity with international global issues, which is a very important practical issue in the world in which we live. It's good for research. It's good for science, for technology. It creates lines of information. It creates communication, which is very, very important in science. I mean, try and think of science without modern science. I'm not speaking, Galileo Galilei could do his science all by himself, maybe other people in his generation. Today, science, people cannot operate by themselves. They need information, they need lines of communication, they need to interact with other scientists and so on, and there is no doubt that the international academic activity encourages this kind of advantage. It's good for economics and economic performance. I'm speaking now of global education. It improves, of course, the familiarity and knowledge of global issues, as mentioned already. It generates skills for effective working in cross-cultural global environments, which today just look a little bit what's going on with transnational companies and so on. You have people from all over the world. You have to communicate. They have to cooperate. And there is no doubt that global academic education has a major contribution. It increases the potential mobility of academics all over the world, and it happens now. We know of people who study, they originate in one place, they study in the second place, and then they work in the third place, and then after a couple of years, they change and they go to a fourth place, and so on. All this is made possible because among other things, of international education. It potentially increases human capital, because if we assume that this ability to operate all over the world and contribute to economic activity all over the world is one of the elements of what we call human capital, then there is no doubt that all your programs contribute significantly to that. By the way, there is something very interesting. I'm not so sure that it's correct, but I will mention it. There is a study that was carried out in the US that suggests that students who took a study abroad program had a much higher rate of employment in the first year after they graduated. Students who took a study abroad program, 98% of them were employed on the first year after graduation. Students who did not take a study abroad program, this is for the United States, correct, were employed only at 49%, practically half, which is a major difference. Moreover, salaries of people who took study abroad programs were 25% higher than salaries of people who did not take study abroad programs. We have to be very, very careful in interpreting these. I didn't look into the research. I didn't look into the methodology. I don't know who are the students who studied abroad, what universities they came from, what are the fields in which they studied, and so on. We know that employment and salaries and the income generation and so on depends on so many factors and variables and so on that it's very difficult to make a generalization. But it's an interesting result. It raises thoughts. What are potential setbacks of global education? The elaborate system of students' exchange involves a very large number of academic institutions with a very wide variety of teaching levels and qualities of education. And I think that you mentioned some of it, some of the problem. And maybe Moshe also mentioned a little bit. So we have thousands of universities, thousands of academic institutions involved. How can we make sure? How can we control for the quality? We know that there are quality differences. I don't know how to measure it. I don't know how to measure it. But we know that there are quality differences. It's obvious. I mean, there is no doubt about that, that there are quality differences. There are excellent institutions and there are poor institutions, and there is a whole range in the middle. How can we make sure that a student that leaves or comes from our institution, goes somewhere else, will receive quality, at least sufficient quality education? Now, Moshe said that the students from Ben-Gurion University who went on the Erasmus Mundus program had, I don't know, a fantastic experience. I'm sure they had a fantastic experience. I spoke with a couple of them when I was at Ben-Gurion University. I'm not sure that if I knew in advance what would have happened on their trip, and I won't say where, it's not important, it's not important. If I would have known in advance, maybe I wouldn't have approved their trip to this place. Because at least in some, I don't want to generalize. I don't want to generalize, and I'm all for international students exchange. But I know that there is sometimes abuse of the system. Now, there are people who just go and have fun, which is okay. It's great, but we don't have to fund it. The European Union doesn't have to fund it. And I'm not sure that we have to encourage it. We want people to go and study there, to have a hard time, as a matter of fact. Hard time in their academic work. After class, they can have a lot of fun. But we want them to work hard and to provide results, to absorb knowledge that they cannot have at home for whatever reason, because of the differences and so on and so forth. And it doesn't always happen. And this is because it's out of control. It's out of control. I mean, when the student goes, we don't know what happens with him, with her, and so on. And so this is a problem that has to be taken care of. By the way, the Bologna process, I think that one of the incentives in establishing the Bologna process was to create a quality control system so that all the involved institutions would reach a certain level of quality, which is extremely important. But then it leads us to another problem. I'm sorry that I am a little bit critical of things that you're involved with. But, as soon as you create a system of quality control, you create a bureaucracy, a regulating bureaucracy. And we know that regulation is good, and we need regulation at a certain level. But when there is over-regulation, we know that it can be harmful. We want to preserve the free spirit of thought. We want to have people thinking out of the box. And as soon as you create regulations, there is a tendency to put everything in boxes. There is a tendency to create a convergence so that everybody, wherever he or she will study, we study the same thing. We take a course in, I don't know, I'm an economist. We take a course in microeconomics. He or she will have exactly the same course, with the same textbook, with the same, I don't know, stories, and so on, everywhere. And it's not good. It's not good. We want diversity. I know that in biology, biodiversity is considered. Who is a biologist here? I don't know. Stavi is a biologist. We know that biodiversity is an essential element of life. And I think that in academia, diversity is extremely important, and we have to make sure not to hurt it. Because otherwise we all become little boxes, and the result is, I don't want to think about it even. I can tell you one thing, by the way, from the field in which maybe I understand a little more than in other fields. And since I'm an economist, you know, I'm interested a little bit more in what happens in financial markets and so on. Not that I have such a great record, but that's beside the point. I can tell you that one of the major problems that have that led to the crisis, the financial crisis of 2008, from which we are still in, we are not yet out of it, is the fact that people who were involved with finances and with banking and with economics and with investments and so on and so forth, they all graduated from schools that taught exactly the same thing. Business schools that had exactly the same program. They all, by the way, tried to...
but they were very creative in their approach.
They were creative in their approach, but they all had the same mentality, the same professional mentality. And you know that there is something, I know that it's not part of my lecture, it's not part of the subject. I don't know why I tell you all that. You know that one of the problems in economic activity, in financial activity, in any kind of economic variable activity is the fluctuation of the variable. And the fluctuations are usually bad. When things go up and down and so on, there are always people who suffer in this movement. Now, when are the fluctuations bigger? They're bigger when the whole market behaves the same way. So for example, when the whole market buys an asset, I don't know, whatever, then it goes up. And then when the whole market, since they behave exactly with the same models, same predicting models, forecasting models. So at a certain point, all the models show that it's time to sell the asset. You know, then the asset falls down. And it creates these fluctuations. Some of it were the result of which is what we saw for the last few years, and we still see, but I don't want to elaborate. I mean, that's a different story and so on. Let me tell you a little bit about my personal experience. My personal experience with international education, as Moshe said, it started at Ben-Gurion University, and Ben-Gurion University has become, over time, thanks to Moshe, and now I understand that Stavi is leading the international program. It is becoming more and more involved in international education, which is very, very good. And in spite of my criticism, I totally support it, and I think that it has been very good for the university. It has been very good for the students, including the students who had fun and didn't study. And there is a long line of activity that has developed. It started, I will be very brief, with something, I don't know if it started, but one of the old elements of international education at Ben-Gurion University was a program that was called the OSP, the Overseas Student Program, that I guess exists until now. And it has developed, and this was a program that brought in students from abroad, mostly from North America, to Ben-Gurion University for a short period of time. A short period of time is 1 semester, 2 semesters, and so on, not for a whole study program. There were other very good, very interesting international projects. There is an international medical school at Ben-Gurion University that is a joint program with Columbia University. There is an MA, there is an international desert a school of desert studies where people do master's degree and PhDs. There is a master's in Middle Eastern studies. There is an international MBA. It's a program that ended, unfortunately. This was a very nice, successful program. There is a program for paramedics. It is called Emergency Medicine at the School of Medicine at Ben-Gurion University. And there was a program whereby students from Jordan, I don't remember the number, I think 30, maybe 25, students from Jordan came to Ben-Gurion University, spent 3 years there, and ended with a bachelor's degree in emergency medicine, which is a formation of paramedics, high-level paramedics that is, of course, a profession that is very needed, not only this part of the world, but probably all over the world. And there was the establishment of the the Office of International Academic Affairs. Moshe was the builder of this office. Builder, I mean, with all respect, not only conceptually, but also he had to build the walls, and not with his own hands, but maybe also with his own hands. And now there is a very nice office, very active, and one of the outcomes is, of course, the Bologna, what's the full name? Bologna Training Center. Now, colleges in Israel, by the way, colleges all over the world. I don't know. You tell me when I have to stop, because I don't want colleges all over the world, but certainly colleges in Israel, are mostly undergraduate institutions. I mean, most of their students are, the great majority, many of the colleges are only undergraduate institutions. And in order to be respected academic institutions and achieve high standards of teaching and research, there is also, in spite of being teaching-oriented, almost every college requires their faculty to do at least some research, and it's very important for the quality of teaching. I mean, people who are totally disconnected from research cannot be good teachers. I mean, they can be eloquent and so on and so forth, but they lose the touch with what's going on in their scientific field, and that's, of course, it's a mistake. And therefore, if colleges want to be updated and want to be respected, they need to be involved in international activity. Colleges in Israel, many of them are located in the periphery. The periphery, of course, we know there is, for whoever knows the geography of Israel, there is a center. The center is practically Tel Aviv and surroundings, and all the rest is periphery. I don't know, maybe Jerusalem is also considered to be center, even though it's 50, 60 kilometers from Tel Aviv. But many of the colleges are in the wilderness. I exaggerate, of course, a little bit. And so they are far in Israeli terms. They are far from a center. And so there is the risk, and it's a very serious risk, I must say, of developing a provinciality that is very bad. Very bad in academia, very bad in any case, but certainly bad in academia. It creates people with small minds who do not really understand the nature of the world and of things that happen in the world, and certainly not everything that happens in the world of academia and of science and so on, which is exactly the things that we do. And therefore, they need probably more than universities to have international education, to have exchange programs. Now, this should include a series of activities. Of course, first of all, cooperation in the field of research. I mean, individual scholars from colleges have to be encouraged and to receive incentives to go and do research and collaborate with people outside of the college and, if possible, abroad. It is extremely important. There is the need to create bilateral programs with other academic institutions in other countries. And it happens, not enough, but it happens. This also triggers potentially joint research, which is, in my view, extremely important. There is a need to develop local facilities, and I think that maybe Amal mentioned a little bit. There is a problem. You see, universities are usually big institutions with many students, with much faculty, with a much more developed infrastructure. In colleges, the infrastructure is very often inadequate, and therefore, if a college wants to develop an international activity, it needs to develop its infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, the intellectual infrastructure, and of course, conditions. It has to incorporate courses in an international language. I mean, if we speak of Israel, you know, courses in Hebrew are insufficient in order to attract students from other places, or faculty, professors from other places. And therefore, a significant number of courses have to be given in an international language. Of course, usually it's English. Not only, but it is English. And of course, there have to be facilities to host students from other countries, professors from other countries, and so on. And all this is not obvious. It's not clear. There are places where these things do not exist. And of course, the bottom line is that all this requires funding. Funding is always a sad issue, certainly in academia. And so it requires a very significant effort in order to obtain the funding needed, if from foundations, from donations, from whatever income that the college can generate. Sapir, the Sapir Academic College, and I will try to be brief because I see that we're getting tired a little bit. Sapir, I am a newcomer to Sapir. I've been there for 2.5 years. Most of my professional life was at Ben-Gurion University. And Sapir is a young college, relatively young, with mostly undergraduate studies. It's located in the south of Israel on the border of the Gaza Strip, which means that there are some security problems for whoever knows the geography of Israel. It has suffered for many years of rocketing and all kinds of unpleasant things. But still, it became a large college. It is today the largest public college. There are private colleges and public colleges in Israel. Sapir is the largest as far as the number of students is concerned. It is the largest public college in Israel, and it is doing quite well. I mean, the students come and study and I hope receive a good education. And until 3 or 4 years ago, there was absolutely no awareness for international studies at Sapir. But you know, the winds of internationalization came all the way down to the border of the Gaza Strip. And about 4 years ago, Sapir started developing international programs, and has done a few things. Of course, there is still a lot to be done. It has developed bilateral activities, bilateral joint activities with universities in many countries in the world, in the US, Germany, the Czech Republic, Poland, France, Ethiopia, India. What else? I don't know, I forgot something. Angola, this year, Angola. And in the past, there were ties with Al-Azhar University in Gaza. Unfortunately, the border between Israel and Gaza, the border which is 2 kilometers from the college, the border between Israel and the Gaza Strip is closed, and therefore the very good ties that existed in the past with Al-Azhar University in Gaza do not exist anymore right now. I hope it will change. The bilateral activities included joint research, mutual seminars of faculty and students, joint seminars, summer courses that were given at Sapir, and of course for students of Sapir to go to other places. The fields of activity are, of course, things that are taught at Sapir, and this is cinema. There is a very interesting school of cinema at Sapir. Communications, public policy, social work, psychology, culture, management, economics, and so on. Now, during the last 3 years, we have also multilateral activity. Multilateral activity that was developed within the programs of the European Union. Sapir is partner in 7 Tempus programs and in 1 Erasmus Mundus program. The Tempus programs, I will just say a word about each of them. The Tempus programs focus on a number of important topics, many of which are directly related to international academic activity. For example, the promotion of English as a scientific language, the development of courses that promote multiculturalism, the strategic development concerning the concept of internalization of academic institutions, the development of courses to enhance the academia-industry link, which is extremely important. It is extremely important, certainly for an institution like Sapir, but I think that for every academic institution, the link with the industry is something that creates a bilateral Hafraya, how do you say Hafraya? Fertilization, right. New methodologies in scientific teaching, international social work, and the Erasmus Mundus program, which is a proved success. It involves, by the way, among others, the Masaryk University and Ben-Gurion and BGU Ben-Gurion University, and of course other institutions. And it involves the exchange of students, faculty, and administrative staff, which is very, very important. I think that administrative staff have to be part of this activity, of this exchange system. Concerning the future, I'm very optimistic. I think that it will develop. I'm speaking of international academic activity. I'm sure that it will develop. I don't see anything that can stop it, and I have no doubt that we will all be beneficiaries of this activity. Thank you.